The briefing room fell silent when she walked in. Not the respectful kind of silence that greets a decorated operator, but the kind laced with sidelong glances and barely suppressed smirks. Lieutenant Kira Volkov moved through it like water through stone, her boots deliberate on the polished floor, her face a mask of professional indifference. She'd learned years ago that reaction was permission. The 8 Marines seated around the tactical table didn't bother hiding their amusement. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over a chest that seemed designed to test the limits of his uniform. Beside him, Corporal Danny Reeves nudged his buddy and whispered something that made 3 others chuckle. At the head of the table, Commander James Holt studied a mission folder with practiced disinterest, though Kira caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He knew what was coming. They all did. This wasn't supposed to be her fight. The mission brief was straightforward on paper. A joint Navy-Marine training exercise in the mountains outside 29 Palms, designed to test interoperability between SEAL units and force recon teams. But everyone in that room understood what it really was, a gauntlet. Kira had been attached to SEAL Team 7 for 6 months, the only woman in a community that had only recently opened its doors to female operators. She'd passed the training pipeline. She'd earned her trident. But earning respect was a different war entirely, one fought in 1,000 small engagements where the rules were never written down. Webb finally broke the silence. "Try not to cry, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying that particular blend of condescension and false concern that made Kira's jaw tighten. "These mountains eat people alive. No shame in tapping out before we even start." The room erupted in muffled laughter. Kira set her gear bag down with precise control and met Webb's eyes across the table. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just held his gaze until the laughter died away and something like uncertainty flickered across his face. Commander Holt cleared his throat. "The exercise parameters are simple. 8 Marines from 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion will establish defensive positions across a 12-mile stretch of high desert terrain. Lieutenant Volkov will attempt infiltration and extraction of a high-value target, a dummy package placed in their secured perimeter. She has 48 hours. Rules of engagement are paint rounds only. Medical support standing by." He closed the folder and looked directly at Kira. "Questions?" She shook her head once. Webb leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Just so we're clear, Lieutenant, this isn't some politically correct training session. My Marines are the best reconnaissance operators in the Corps. We've been doing this since before you could spell SEAL." Kira picked up her gear bag. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost conversational. "Then it should be interesting." She turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, Reeves called out, "Hey Volkov, what's your call sign anyway?" She paused at the threshold, glanced back over her shoulder. "Ghost." The word hung in the air like smoke. Then she was gone, leaving 8 Marines laughing at a joke they didn't understand yet. The desert night was ink black when Kira began her movement. No moon, just stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. She'd studied the terrain maps for 3 days, memorizing every ridge line, every wash, every piece of dead ground that might offer concealment. The Marines would expect her to move at night, so she'd started at dusk, using the golden hour when shadows played tricks and eyes struggled to adjust. Her kit was stripped to essentials: rifle with thermal sight, sidearm, minimal ammunition, water, medical supplies, comms gear set to scan frequencies. No unnecessary weight. Speed and stealth would be her force multipliers against an entrenched defensive position. Webb's team had established their perimeter on high ground overlooking a narrow canyon. Classic force recon tactics controlling the terrain, interlocking fields of fire, security patrols rotating in unpredictable patterns. They were good. Kira had read their service records. Webb had 2 combat deployments. Reeves was a designated marksman. The others were all seasoned operators who'd earned their reconnaissance specialist designation through sweat and evaluation. They expected her to fail. More precisely, they wanted her to fail. Not out of personal malice necessarily, but because her success would challenge something fundamental in their worldview. Kira understood this. She'd grown up in a household where her father, a retired Army Ranger, had told her repeatedly that women didn't belong in combat. She'd joined the Navy to prove him wrong. She'd become a SEAL to prove herself right. The first Marine position materialized out of the darkness exactly where Kira expected it. A two-man observation post nestled between boulders, thermal blankets disguising their heat signatures, night vision scanning the approaches. She was 200 meters out, prone in a shallow depression, watching them through her own thermal optic. They were disciplined. No unnecessary movement, no light, no noise, but discipline had patterns and patterns could be exploited. She waited. Patience was a weapon they'd tried to teach at Bud S, but most people never truly understood. It wasn't about enduring discomfort. It was about becoming part of the environment, letting time dissolve urgency until opportunity revealed itself. 20 minutes passed. Then one of the Marines shifted position, reaching for his water bottle. Just a few seconds of inattention, but enough. Kira moved. Not running, but flowing across the ground like liquid shadow, using micro-terrain features to break up her silhouette. She covered 50 meters before the Marine returned to his scan pattern. Then she froze again, becoming stone. The desert wind picked up, carrying sage and dust. It would mask any small sounds, but it also meant the Marine's acoustic detection would be limited. Another advantage. She worked her way closer, meter by meter, using the wind's rhythm to time her movements. By midnight, Kira had bypassed 3 observation posts and penetrated the outer security perimeter. The Marines' defensive positions were well conceived, but they'd made a subtle tactical error. They'd positioned their forces to defend against an assault, not an infiltration. Their interlocking fields of fire were designed to repel an attacking force, but in doing so, they'd created dead spaces, areas between positions where movement was possible if you knew where to look. She found one such corridor running along a drainage channel carved by seasonal floods. It wasn't on the maps, which meant the Marines probably hadn't identified it either. The channel was shallow, barely 2 feet deep, choked with dried brush that scraped against her uniform as she low-crawled through it. Every meter took careful negotiation. Her rifle slung across her back, she moved by feel, keeping her profile below ground level. The brush provided concealment but also created noise hazards. She moved in rhythms, timing her progression to natural sounds, wind gusts, distant aircraft, the settling of cooling rocks. Above her, perhaps 30 meters to the east, she heard voices. 2 Marines on patrol, their conversation drifting down into the channel. They were talking about basketball scores, completely casual, and that told Kira everything she needed to know. They didn't believe she'd made it this far. They were going through motions, fulfilling their assignments, but without genuine conviction that the threat was real. She let them pass, then continued her movement. An hour later, she'd reached the inner perimeter. This was the critical moment. The target package was located in what the Marines had designated their command post, a natural rock formation that provided overhead cover and good visibility. Webb would be there, coordinating his team, confident in his defensive setup. Kira settled into a hide position 40 meters from the command post and began her reconnaissance. Through her thermal sight, she counted 4 heat signatures. Webb, definitely. 2 others she recognized from the briefing. The 4th was probably Reeves, positioned as Overwatch. They were alert now, not complacent like the outer patrols. This would require something different. She keyed her radio, switching to the exercise control frequency. Control, this is Ghost. Request permission to demonstrate capabilities before target extraction. There was a long pause. Then Commander Holt's voice crackled back, tinged with curiosity. Ghost Control, what are you proposing? Kira smiled in the darkness. I'm going to mark all 8 Marines before retrieving the package. Paint rounds to center mass. I want them to understand what happened. Another pause. She could almost hear Holt weighing the implications. Then, permission granted, control standing by. She switched off the radio and began to move again. The first Marine never knew what happened. He was positioned on the southern approach, sitting with his back against a boulder, night vision mounted and scanning. Kira approached from behind, using the boulder itself as concealment, moving with glacial slowness. When she was close enough to hear his breathing, She raised her rifle and placed a single paint round into his back at point-blank range. The impact made him jerk forward with a startled grunt. Before he could react, she pressed 2 fingers against the side of his neck, not a threat, just a message. "You're dead," she whispered. Then she was gone, melting back into the darkness before he could turn around. The Marine keyed his radio voice tight with shock. "Contact, southern sector, I'm hit. She was right behind me." Kira heard Webb's response, calm but sharp. "All positions, increase alertness. She's inside the wire. Converge on the command post." But converging created movement, and movement created opportunities. The second Marine went down 3 minutes later as he repositioned. Kira had anticipated his route, set up an ambush position along a natural pathway between rocks, and put a paint round through his ribs as he passed. He spun, trying to acquire her position, but she was already 20 meters away, circling. The third and fourth Marines she took simultaneously. They'd paired up for mutual security, which was smart tactics against a conventional threat. But Kira wasn't conventional. She'd climbed onto a rock shelf above their position, using handholds that required climbing skills most Marines didn't train for regularly. From above, she had clear shots on both of them. 2 paint rounds, 2 seconds apart, both center mass. Webb's voice on the radio now carried an edge. "All remaining positions go static. I repeat, go static. Do not move from your positions." It was the right call, but it also meant his force was now paralyzed, afraid to maneuver. Kira could feel the shift happening. This wasn't about the exercise anymore. This was about respect, earned meter by meter, shot by shot. The 5th Marine was their designated marksman, Reeves, positioned as overwatch on the highest point of the position. He was good scanning constantly, controlling his sector with professional discipline. Getting to him would require something special. Kira spent 20 minutes working her way up the opposite side of his position, climbing hand over hand up a near-vertical rock face that would have been impossible to attempt with full gear. Her fingers found purchase in cracks barely wide enough to grip. Her feet balanced on edges that crumbled under pressure. She didn't think about falling. She thought about the next handhold, the next move, the singular focus that had carried her through Hell Week and every impossible thing since. When she crested the ridge, Reeves was 15 meters away, prone behind his rifle, watching the approaches below. His back was to her. She could have taken the shot from there, but instead she low-crawled closer, getting within 5 meters. Then she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Bang! Reeves jerked around, rifle swinging, but Kira's weapon was already aimed at his chest. She fired once. The paint round hit him square in the sternum. His eyes went wide, not with fear but with something else. Recognition maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "How did you're dead," Kira said quietly. "Stop talking." She left him there and descended back into the main perimeter. 3 Marines remained, Webb and 2 others protecting the command post. They knew she was coming now. The element of surprise was gone, replaced by something more challenging, a direct confrontation with an alerted, prepared force. Webb's voice came through on the radio again, this time addressing her directly. "Volkov, I know you can hear me. You've made your point, but you're not getting past the 3 of us. We're dug in, we've got overlapping fields of fire, and we know exactly where you have to approach from." Kira didn't respond. She was already moving, but not toward the command post. Instead, she circled wide, climbing higher into the rocks above their position. Webb had been right about one thing. She couldn't approach from ground level, not without exposing herself to their fire. But he'd made an assumption about what constituted an approach. The rock formation housing their command post had a natural chimney running up its backside, a vertical crack in the stone about 2 feet wide. Climbers would call it a squeeze chimney, the kind that required wedging your body into the crack and shimmying upward using opposing pressure. It was claustrophobic, physically exhausting, and nobody in their right mind would attempt it at night. Kira entered the chimney and began to climb. The rock pressed against her chest and back simultaneously, forcing her to exhale to make progress. Her rifle banged against stone with every movement, and she had to work it carefully through narrow sections. Her legs shook with effort as she pushed against one wall while pulling with her arms against the other. Sweat soaked through her uniform. Her breathing echoed in the confined space. She climbed for 15 minutes, gaining perhaps 20 vertical feet until she reached a ledge directly above the command post. Below, she could hear Webb and his 2 remaining Marines, their voices drifting up through the night. "She's going to have to come through that gap," one of them said. "It's the only approach with any cover." "Agreed," Webb replied. "Jensen, keep your sector. Martinez, watch the right flank. I'll take center." They were positioned exactly as Kira had anticipated, focused outward, protecting against ground-level approach. She secured a handhold, shifted her position to free her rifle, and looked down through her thermal sight. 3 clear targets, none of them looking up. She fired 3 times in rapid succession. The paint rounds hit Webb first, then Jensen, then Martinez, each shot placed with surgical precision in the center of their backs. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Webb turned around, tilting his head back to look up at the rock wall above him. His face was invisible in the darkness, but Kira imagined the expression there. She rappelled down using a rope she'd brought specifically for this purpose, descending into the command post with controlled drops. When her boots hit the ground, the 3 Marines were standing there, paint splattered and speechless. Kira walked past them without a word, retrieved the dummy package from its secured container and keyed her radio. "Control, Ghost. Package acquired. All 8 opposing forces neutralized. Requesting extraction." Commander Holt's response came through with barely controlled amazement. "Ghost Control, confirm you're saying all 8 Marines are down." "Confirmed. Paint rounds to center mass on all targets. 0 return fire sustained." There was a long pause, then Holt's voice again, formal now. "Roger, Ghost. Extraction team inbound to your location. Exercise terminated. Well done." Kira set the package down and finally looked at Webb. He was staring at her with an expression that wasn't quite respect yet but wasn't mockery either. It was something transitional, like ice beginning to thaw. "How?" he asked finally. "How did you get above us?" She considered not answering, but that would be a petty victory and she'd never been interested in those. "You defended against what you expected, not what was possible. You controlled the ground but forgot about the vertical dimension." Webb nodded slowly, processing. Then, to her surprise, he extended his hand. "That was exceptional work, Lieutenant." Kira shook his hand, grip firm but not challenging. "You built a solid defense, Staff Sergeant, but solid isn't the same as comprehensive." Behind Webb, Reeves had climbed down from his overwatch position. He approached with his rifle slung, paint still visible on his uniform. "That climb to my position," he said. "That rock face was nearly vertical. I didn't think anyone could." "But Kira interrupted. "We do a lot of cliff work. It's part of the training." The extraction helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, rotors beating the desert air into submission. As Kira loaded her gear, Commander Holt stepped out of the aircraft and approached. His face was carefully neutral, but she caught the slight smile at the corner of his mouth. "The exercise monitors recorded everything," he said quietly. "Your infiltration, the shots, all of it. This is going to become required viewing for reconnaissance training." Kira nodded but didn't respond. She wasn't interested in becoming a case study. She was interested in being a SEAL, doing the job, earning her place through performance rather than publicity. Holt seemed to understand. He gestured toward the waiting Marines. "They want to debrief with you, learn how you did it. Are you willing?" She glanced over at Webb and his team, now gathered in a loose group, their body language transformed from the cocky confidence of the briefing room. They looked like students now, ready to learn. "Yeah," she said. "I'm willing." Debrief lasted 3 hours. They sat in a circle on the desert floor and Kira walked them through her entire infiltration. The route selection, the timing, the patience required, the climbing techniques, the exploitation of their defensive pattern. She didn't hold back. This wasn't about maintaining mystique. It was about making them better, which in turn would make the entire community better. Webb asked most of the questions, his tone stripped of condescension, replaced with genuine professional curiosity. "The chimney climb," he said. "That was the key move. How did you even know it was there?" "Studied the geological survey maps," Kira replied. "Not just the tactical overlays. Rock formations have predictable fracture patterns. Granite tends to develop vertical cracks along stress lines. I was looking for any vertical feature on the back side of your position." Martinez, one of the Marines she'd marked at the command post, shook his head in admiration. We never even considered someone might come from above. We focused entirely on ground approaches. That's the lesson, Kira said. Conventional tactics work against conventional thinking, but the moment you assume your opponent will play by the same rules, you create vulnerabilities. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the rocks in shades of amber and gold, the group finally broke up. The Marines headed back to their barracks, exhausted but animated, already discussing how to modify their defensive doctrines. Webb lingered, waiting until the others had moved out of earshot. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low and serious. "That comment in the briefing room, 'Try not to cry, sweetheart,' that was unprofessional and disrespectful. You didn't deserve it." Kira met his eyes. She could have accepted graciously and moved on, but that felt incomplete somehow. "You're right, I didn't deserve it, but I also understand where it came from. This community has operated a certain way for a long time. Change is uncomfortable. I don't expect everyone to celebrate my presence, but I do expect to be judged on my performance." Webb nodded. "You've earned that judgment tonight, more than earned it." He extended his hand again, and this time the handshake felt different, not a concession, but a genuine acknowledgement between equals. After he left, Kira stood alone in the growing light, the desert wind pulling at her uniform. She felt the weight of the night's work settling into her muscles, the accumulated exhaustion of physical effort and mental focus. But beneath that, something else. Not satisfaction exactly, not vindication, more like validation. She'd proven what she'd always known but could never quite make others understand. That capability wasn't determined by gender, that toughness came in different forms, that the title of warrior belonged to anyone willing to earn it through sacrifice and skill. Commander Holt approached, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to Kira without speaking. They stood side by side, watching the sun fully crest the horizon. "Your call sign," Holt said after a long silence. "Ghost. I assume there's a story there." Kira sipped the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "My first training dive at Bud S, we were doing underwater navigation, and I got separated from my swim buddy in murky water. The instructors lost track of me for 15 minutes. When I finally surfaced at the correct waypoint, one of them said I'd moved like a ghost through the water. The name stuck." "It suits you," Holt said. "What you did last night, that wasn't just good tactics. That was an artistic dismantling of a prepared defensive position. 8 trained Marines, and none of them even saw you coming until it was too late." Kira didn't respond immediately. She was thinking about her father, the retired ranger who told her women didn't belong in combat. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, not since she'd entered the SEAL pipeline. Part of her wanted to call him now to tell him about this night, but another part knew that would be the wrong reason. She hadn't done this to prove her father wrong. She'd done it to prove herself right. "The Marines," she said finally. "They'll learn from this. Adapt. Next time will be harder." Holt smiled. "That's the point, isn't it? We all get better by pushing each other." He finished his coffee and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Lieutenant, you're exactly the kind of operator this community needs. Not because you're a woman, because you're exceptional at the job. The two things just happen to coincide." After he left, Kira remained on the ridge, watching the desert transform under sunlight. The rocks that had hidden her during the night now stood exposed and obvious. Terrain was always relative to circumstance, she reflected. What concealed in darkness became visible in light. What seemed impossible in theory became achievable through application. The lessons of the night had broader implications, but she was too tired to explore them fully. She made her way back to the helicopter, where the crew chief was running post-flight checks. He glanced up as she approached, then did a double take at the amount of dust and rock residue covering her uniform. "Rough night, Lieutenant." "Productive night," she corrected. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. Kira used the time to sleep, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion once the mission was complete. She dreamed of climbing, of vertical spaces where gravity became suggestion rather than law, of movement that defied expectation. When she woke, they were landing at Naval Air Station North Island. The crew chief tapped her shoulder gently. "We're home, ma'am. Welcome back." She gathered her gear and stepped out into California sunshine, the rotor wash pushing hot air across the tarmac. Other SEALs from her team were waiting near the hangar, and she could see from their expressions that word had already spread. They didn't cheer or celebrate. That wasn't the culture. But Lieutenant Chris Morrison, her team leader, gave her a single nod of acknowledgement that meant more than applause. "The Admiral wants to see you," Morrison said. "He's in his office now." Kira felt a flicker of concern. "Am I in trouble?" Morrison's face remained neutral. "I don't think so, but he specifically asked for you by call sign. Said he wanted to hear about Ghost's desert operation firsthand." The Admiral's office was located in the headquarters building, overlooking the flight line. Rear Admiral Thomas Garrett had commanded SEAL operations in 3 theaters and was known as a straight shooter who cared more about results than politics. When Kira entered, he was standing at his window, hands clasped behind his back. "Lieutenant Volkov," he said without turning around. "Sit." She sat in one of the chairs facing his desk, keeping her posture straight despite her fatigue. Garrett turned and studied her for a long moment. "I've read Commander Holt's preliminary report," he said finally. 8 Force Recon Marines neutralized without sustaining any return fire, package extracted successfully. Infiltration route that included technical climbing most operators wouldn't attempt in daylight, much less darkness. He moved to his desk and opened a folder. "I've also reviewed the video footage. Your movement discipline is exceptional, your tactical patience is remarkable, and your shot placement was surgical." He closed the folder and looked directly at her. "This is the kind of performance we expect from SEAL Team 7. You represented this command with distinction." "Thank you, sir," Kira said. Garrett sat down, his expression shifting to something more thoughtful. "But I want to talk about what happens next. You're aware that your presence in the teams has been controversial in some circles. There are people who believe the standards were lowered to accommodate female candidates. There are people who think this is social engineering rather than operational necessity." Kira felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. "I'm aware, sir." "Good, because those people are wrong, and last night you proved it definitively. But proving it once isn't enough. You're going to face versions of last night over and over again. Every exercise, every training evolution, every deployment, someone is going to be watching, waiting for you to fail, ready to say your success was a fluke." "I understand that, sir," Kira said. "I've understood it since day one of Bud S." Garrett nodded. "I believe you do, but here's what I want you to understand additionally. You're not just fighting for your own place anymore. Whether you want it or not, you've become a symbol. Every woman considering this pipeline is going to look at your performance and decide if it's possible. Every commander is going to use your example when making decisions about female integration. That's a heavy burden, and it's not entirely fair, but it's real." He stood up again, moving back to the window. "So I need to know, are you prepared for that, for being held to a different standard, for having your every action scrutinized more closely than your male teammates?" Kira took a breath, considering her response carefully. "Sir, I've been held to a different standard my entire career. The question isn't whether I'm prepared for it. The question is whether the community is prepared to judge me honestly, not more harshly because of my gender, but not with lowered expectations either. I want to be measured by the same yardstick as everyone else. Can I do the job? Do I make the team better? Will I have my teammates' backs when it matters?" Garrett turned and smiled, actually smiled, something Kira hadn't seen him do before. "That's exactly the right answer, Lieutenant. And based on last night's performance, the answer to all 3 questions is yes." He returned to his desk and pulled out another folder. "I'm assigning you to an upcoming mission in Southeast Asia, joint operation with Philippine forces, focusing on maritime interdiction and coastal reconnaissance. It's a real-world operation, not an exercise. You'll be embedded with Filipino naval special warfare units, advising and assisting. It's high-visibility work that will require cultural sensitivity and tactical expertise." Kira felt her pulse quicken. Real-world operations were why she joined. The training was essential, but it was validation in actual missions that mattered most. "When do we deploy, sir?" 3 weeks. You'll get a full brief tomorrow, but I wanted to tell you personally because I need you to understand something." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're getting this assignment because you're the best person for the job, not to make a political statement, not to check a diversity box. Because your skill set matches the mission requirements and I trust you to execute successfully. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "Yes, sir," Kira said. "And one more thing," Garrett added. "I've been in the teams for 28 years. I've seen exceptional operators come through these doors, people who redefine what we thought was possible. What you did last night, that A-tower infiltration, that tactical problem-solving that ranks among the most impressive individual performances I've witnessed. Not impressive for a woman, just impressive, period." After leaving the Admiral's office, Kira made her way to the team room where SEAL Team 7 conducted their daily operations. It was early afternoon, and most of the team was present, cleaning weapons, reviewing intelligence reports, or conducting physical training. When she entered, the conversations didn't stop, but she felt the attention shift toward her. Morrison called out from across the room, "Ghost, come here." She walked over to where he stood with 3 other team members: Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, Petty Officer First Class Ahmed Karim, and Petty Officer Second Class Lucas Brennan. They were gathered around a laptop, reviewing what looked like mission planning documents. "We heard about your desert adventure," Sullivan said, his weathered face creasing into a grin. "8 Marines marked and never got a shot off. That's some serious work." "It was a good night," Kira said, deflecting. She'd never been comfortable with praise, had always preferred to let performance speak for itself. Karim turned the laptop toward her. "We're planning a hostage rescue exercise for next month. Urban environment, multiple entry points, unknown hostile positions. After seeing what you did in open terrain, I want your input on how we might exploit vertical approaches in a city environment." For the next 2 hours, they worked together on the planning, and Kira felt something shift. These weren't men humoring her or testing her. They were genuinely seeking her expertise, incorporating her ideas, treating her as a full member of the team. It was Morrison who finally articulated what everyone was thinking. "You know what last night was really about," he said during a lull in the planning. "It was about trust. The Marines tested you because they needed to know if you could be trusted to do the job. Now they know. And more importantly, everyone watching knows. That matters." Brennan nodded. "In the teams, we don't care about politics or social issues or any of that outside noise. We care about one thing: can the person next to me do their job when everything goes wrong? You've answered that question." As evening approached, Kira finally returned to her quarters. She showered, washing away the desert dust and the accumulated grime of the operation. The hot water felt like absolution, stripping away the physical evidence of the night while leaving the intangible achievements intact. She stood under the spray for a long time, eyes closed, letting exhaustion and satisfaction mingle. When she finally emerged, there was a message on her phone, a text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, but curiosity made her open it. It was from Staff Sergeant Webb. "My team and I have been talking. We want to invite you to participate in our next training cycle. We need someone who can teach us how to think differently. If you're interested, let me know." Kira stared at the message for a long moment. This was what transformation looked like: not sudden epiphanies or dramatic conversions, but gradual shifts in perspective, recognition earned through demonstration. She typed a response: "I'm interested. Let me know the schedule." Then she set the phone down and looked at herself in the mirror. The face looking back was tired but clear-eyed, marked by sun and wind but not beaten down. Somewhere beneath the surface features, she could see the girl who'd grown up being told she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, tough enough. That girl seemed very far away now, separated by years of training and proving and fighting for space in a world that hadn't been designed to include her. But she was still there in the foundation, providing the motivation that drove everything else. Kira's thoughts turned to her father. The silence between them had lasted 3 years, sustained by stubbornness on both sides and pain that ran too deep for easy resolution. He'd been a good father in many ways, taught her discipline, self-reliance, mental toughness. But he'd also placed limits on what he believed she could achieve, limits based on his own experiences in a military that had operated under different rules. She wondered if he'd heard about her joining the SEALs. Probably. The military community was smaller than people realized, and news traveled. She wondered what he thought, whether any part of him felt pride mixing with the disappointment. She wondered if he'd ever call, but she couldn't wait for that call. Couldn't structure her choices around seeking his approval. That way led to compromise and resentment. The next morning, Kira attended the mission brief for the Southeast Asia deployment. The operations officer laid out the details. 3 months embedded with Filipino naval forces, advising on counter-piracy operations, conducting joint training exercises, and establishing interoperability protocols. The region had seen increased maritime threats, and the Philippine government had requested American Special Operations support. You'll be working directly with their Naval Special Operations Group, the operations officer explained. They're professional, well-trained, but they could benefit from our latest tactics and techniques. Your job is to share knowledge, build relationships, and represent SEAL Team 7 with the highest standards of professionalism. Kira took notes, already thinking about cultural considerations, language barriers, tactical differences. This was complex work that required more than just combat skills. It required diplomacy, teaching ability, and the capacity to adapt American tactics to different operational contexts. After the brief, Morrison pulled her aside. "This deployment is going to be important for your career," he said quietly. "You'll be the first female SEAL deployed in an advisory capacity to that region. Eyes are going to be watching, but I wouldn't have recommended you if I didn't think you could handle it." "I appreciate the confidence, sir," Kira said. Morrison smiled. "It's not confidence. It's recognition of demonstrated capability. There's a difference." The 3 weeks before deployment passed quickly, filled with pre-mission training, equipment preparation, and language study. Kira spent hours with a Tagalog tutor, learning enough of the local language to show respect even if fluency wasn't achievable. She also continued her physical training, maintaining the edge that had served her so well in the desert. One afternoon, while running along the beach near the base, she encountered Reeves. The Marine was also running, and they fell into step together without discussion. For a mile they ran in silence, waves crashing to their left, sun beating down from above. Finally, Reeves spoke. "I've been thinking about that night," he said, breathing hard from the pace. "About how you got above my position, and I realized something. It wasn't just skill, it was mindset. You approached the problem without preconceptions about what was possible." Kira considered this. Maybe I was just desperate enough to try things other people wouldn't. "No," Reeves said firmly. "Desperation is different. Desperation is chaotic. What you did was calculated risk-taking based on clear assessment of capabilities and requirements. That's not desperation. That's mastery." They ran another half-mile before Reeves spoke again. "I wanted to thank you for the debrief, for sharing your process. You didn't have to do that. You could have kept the mystique, let us wonder, but instead you taught us. That says something about your character." Kira slowed to a walk, her breathing gradually settling. "We're all on the same side," she said. "The goal isn't to prove I'm better than Marines. The goal is to make everyone better at the mission. If sharing my approach helps you do your job more effectively, then we all benefit." They parted ways at the parking lot, and Kira drove back to her quarters. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She thought about what Reeves had said, about mindset and mastery. There was truth there, but also incompleteness. What he'd called mastery was really just stubbornness refined through repetition. She'd succeeded in the desert not because she had some innate gift, but because she'd refused to accept limitations, had trained past the point where most people stopped, had cultivated capabilities specifically because people said they were impossible for someone like her. The night before deployment, Kira sat on her bed and wrote a letter. Not to her father, that bridge was still unrepaired, but to her younger sister Maya, who was starting college. Maya had been supportive throughout Kira's career, had defended her against family criticism, had believed when others doubted. The letter was long and detailed, full of lessons learned and advice given. But the core message was simple. Define yourself by what you can do, not by what others say you can't. The world will always have opinions about your limitations. Ignore them. Find out for yourself. She sealed the letter and set it aside for mailing. Then she lay back and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the deployment ahead. 3 months in a foreign country, working with foreign forces, representing not just her team but her entire community. The pressure would be intense, the scrutiny constant, but that was fine. She'd been operating under pressure her entire career. The flight to the Philippines took 16 hours with one refueling stop. Kira used the time to review briefing materials, study cultural notes, and mentally prepare for the transition. When the aircraft finally touched down at Sangley Point, the heat hit her like a physical force-thick, humid air that made breathing feel like work. She was met by a Filipino naval officer, Commander Ramon Santos, who greeted her with formal courtesy. "Lieutenant Volkov, welcome to the Philippines. I am Commander Santos, liaison officer for this operation. We are honored to have a U.S. Navy SEAL supporting our forces." Kira shook his hand. "The honor is mine, Commander. I'm looking forward to working with your special operators." Santos drove her to the naval base where she'd be stationed. Along the way, he provided context about the operational environment, increasing piracy in the southern waters, tensions with rival claimants in disputed territories, the need for enhanced maritime security capabilities.